The hangar of the Imperial Dreadnought was suffused with an unnatural stillness, the kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from a tension so taut it threatens to snap. Metal walls hummed faintly with the vibration of the ship's colossal engines as a procession of armored guards escorted a long row of sealed containers toward a restricted sector. Each container hissed with a low mechanical breath, like coffins that refused to sleep. The guards carried themselves with the smug detachment of conquerors, but none dared meet the eyes of the officer leading them. His rank insignia gleamed under the harsh lights as he stalked forward with clipped steps, a predator masking unease with arrogance. Inside those containers were the Empire's newest trophies, abducted human girls taken from shattered colonies at the far edges of contested space. Rumors had already begun to coil like smoke through the ship. Humans were unremarkable, primitive even, but their biological composition was strangely coveted by the Empire's genetic core. Whispers spoke of experiments, of hybridization, of twisted ambitions to extract obedience through manipulation of flesh and memory. Yet among the prisoners there had been resistance. One girl, young and gaunt, had stared directly into her captor's face and hissed a sentence that made even the seasoned officer pause. "You don't understand what you've done. Humanity never forgets." The words lingered like a curse, echoing through the metallic corridors, carried in hushed conversations between soldiers who would rather not admit their unease. On a barren asteroid several systems away, 5 men studied the intercepted transmissions that confirmed the abductions. The chamber they occupied was a hollowed cavern reinforced with scavenged steel, its walls sweating with condensation from barely functional life support units. Captain Elias Ward leaned over the projection table, his sharp features lit by the ghostly glow of intercepted Imperial code. His jaw was clenched, every line of his face drawn tight with restrained fury. He was not a man given to outbursts, but the loss of his younger sister to an earlier raid had carved something permanent into him, a wound that never healed but hardened into resolve. Beside him, Marcus Hale shifted uncomfortably in his chair, running a hand through unruly dark hair. He was the squad's engineer, a man whose quick wit and sharper tongue often masked the quiet terror of watching the galaxy unravel. He tapped at the console with restless fingers, muttering about the Empire's arrogance, his cynicism barely concealing the fire smoldering beneath. Damian Cross sat apart from the others, polishing the barrel of his rifle with the precision of a ritual. His silence was not indifference but armor. He carried ghosts no words could exorcise, and every time he sighted down the scope, he carried their memory with him. Adrian Locke leaned against a bulkhead, arms folded, his eyes distant yet calculating. He was the philosopher among warriors, the man who would question the morality of burning a city, but still be the first to light the torch if it meant survival. His voice, calm but edged with iron, often played counterpoint to Elias's unyielding pragmatism. At the edge of the room crouched Jonas Varick, his restless energy filling the cavern like static. He tinkered with a block of explosives, humming under his breath, reckless brilliance flickering in the curve of his grin. He lived too close to the fire, and everyone knew it, but in the chaos of resistance, his chaos was an asset. The 5 men were bound less by duty than by necessity, by a brotherhood forged in desperation and sharpened through blood. Each carried scars, visible and unseen, and each knew the stakes better than any council of distant politicians. The intercepted data was unambiguous. The Empire had taken humans not for execution, not for slavery, but for something far worse. Elias traced the coordinates displayed on the projection, the route of Imperial convoy carrying their people deeper into the Empire's core systems. His voice was low but unshakable when he spoke. "They've crossed a line. If they think we'll sit and bleed quietly, they don't understand what humanity is capable of." Marcus scoffed, though there was no humor in it. "They've never understood. To them we're insects. A curiosity to dissect. But insects bite." He smirked without joy, the weight of his words settling on the group. Damian finally spoke, his voice rough as gravel, every syllable reluctant but deliberate. "We strike the convoy. We take back who we can. If we don't, the Empire learns they can do this without consequence. And once they believe that, there's no stopping what comes next." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "A strike is suicide if we're careless. They'll expect resistance. We can't save everyone, and we'll damn ourselves if we fight without purpose. We have to decide, do we strike for vengeance, or do we strike for survival?" Jonas chuckled darkly, setting aside the explosive. "Survival's overrated. They've already declared war on us, whether we admit it or not. I'd rather burn with my finger on the trigger than choke waiting for mercy that won't come. The caverns seemed to contract around them, the weight of choice pressing like the vacuum outside their fragile walls. Elias stared at the flickering data one last time before lifting his gaze. The fire in his eyes was no longer restrained. We strike. Not because it will change the course of this war overnight, but because it will remind the Empire we are not prey. If they take one more of ours, they'll pay in blood and fire. The decision was made, and with it came a ripple of inevitability. Preparation consumed them for days, each man sharpening his role like a blade. Marcus rebuilt the navigation system of their battered ship, coaxing life from circuitry long past its prime. Damien calibrated his rifle with obsessive precision, ensuring no margin for error. Adrian drafted contingency after contingency, a web of possibilities for a mission that could collapse at any second. Jonas filled their storage with enough explosives to cripple a dreadnought, grinning as though daring fate to stop him. And Elias carried the silence of a man who had already buried too many and refused to add more names to the list. When the day came, they launched under the cover of drifting debris, their small vessel a shadow among the stars. The Imperial convoy shimmered ahead, a procession of gleaming metal guarded by cruisers that dwarfed their ship. Every breath in the cabin seemed louder than the engines as they crept closer, hearts synchronized to the rhythm of danger. Marcus guided them into the convoy's blind spot, threading through the narrow margin between death and discovery. Sweat glistened on his brow, but his hands were steady, his muttered curses turning into something like prayer. They breached the hold of a transport vessel with surgical precision, Jonas's charges peeling open the hull like paper. The moment of silence after the explosion was shattered by alarms and the staccato bark of gunfire. Damien's rifle sang in reply, every shot unerring, every body that fell a step toward their people. Elias led the charge with ruthless clarity, his commands cutting through the chaos, his movements a storm of intent. Adrian covered their flanks, his strategies unfolding like chess played with blood, while Jonas unleashed havoc, each detonation a punctuation of fury. They reached the containment cells, the hiss of hydraulics unveiling rows of frightened eyes. Some were. The broadcast ignited the galaxy like a spark dropped into dry grass. Across star systems, over military channels, civilian networks, and encrypted lines, the voice of humanity cut through with surgical clarity. It was not the trembling plea of the conquered, nor the rhetoric of the desperate. It was the deliberate, unflinching tone of a species that had chosen its path. You took our daughters. You desecrated our kind. The Galactic Empire will cease to exist. The words lingered even after transmission ended, leaving silence heavier than any threat. In that silence, alien leaders shifted uneasily, and Imperial officers, long accustomed to seeing humans as weak, began to doubt the permanence of their dominance. On a hidden station orbiting the fractured moon of Vanar, Elias Ward stood before a crowd of resistance fighters and survivors. His uniform was patched, his eyes hollowed by nights without rest, but his voice carried the conviction of a man whose grief had transmuted into unyielding resolve. He outlined the plan with deliberate strokes, an all-front assault, not for territory, not for negotiation, but for extinction. They would target not just the Empire's fleets, but its infrastructure, its breeding worlds, its genetic archives, the pillars of its survival. The word extinction carried a weight that made some flinch, but Elias spoke it without hesitation, because hesitation had already cost them too much. Marcus Hale, hunched over a battered console, listened with the skeptical frown that had become his trademark. Extinction, huh? Big word, Captain. Means no going back. Means we burn everything, even the scraps. His voice was sharp, but beneath it was a current of fear, not of the Empire, but of humanity losing itself in the fire it lit. He wanted revenge, but he feared what it would make of them. Damien Cross stood near the viewport, rifle slung across his shoulder, watching the stars like they might answer questions he couldn't voice. His silence was its own language, but when he finally spoke, it was with the quiet certainty of a man who had already accepted his death. They took the last of my family. There's nothing left to lose. If extinction is the road, I'll walk it. His tone held no tremor, no hesitation. Adrian Locke folded his arms, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of measured thought. We must understand what we're declaring. Extinction is not justice. It's obliteration. Entire systems burned, billions who had no part in this war turned to ash. We risk becoming the monsters we claim to fight." His words hung heavy, yet even he did not oppose the path outright. He was not blind to the scale of cruelty inflicted, but his conscience wrestled with the enormity of their response. Jonas Varric grinned from where he sat cross-legged among crates of explosives, his hands busy with the delicate wiring of death. "You're all talking like philosophers. I don't care what word you slap on it, justice, vengeance, extinction. It's all the same once the stars start burning. Let them taste the fear they gave us." His laugh was jagged, the laugh of a man who had long ago chosen madness over despair. Together they formed the core of humanity's answer. They were not politicians or diplomats, not even professional soldiers in the old sense. They were survivors, scarred men who had buried too much to settle for anything less than the Empire's annihilation. Their arguments sharpened their resolve, each man carrying his doubts, but none retreating from the inevitable march toward war. The first waves of retaliation swept through the Empire like firestorms. Human fleets, once fractured and scattered, had converged under the banner of survival. They unleashed weapons the Empire had dismissed as primitive, but discovered too late were devastating in their simplicity. Kinetic slugs launched at near-light speeds tore through capital ships, AI-driven drones swarmed like metallic locusts, and void bombs collapsed entire defense stations into implosions of silence. The galaxy had seen wars, but never had it seen a species fight with the fury of extinction at its back. Elias's squad spearheaded missions designed not for conquest, but for devastation. On the world of Caliph, they infiltrated the Imperial genetic archives, Jonas's charges turning libraries of centuries-old data into ash. On the shipyards of Foros, Damien's rifle carved a path through enemy officers, while Marcus rewired docking clamps to chain warships in place as explosives consumed them. Adrian orchestrated diversions so complex that the Empire wasted fleets chasing phantoms while humanity struck where least expected. Each mission deepened their legend and spread fear like a contagion through Imperial ranks. Yet with every victory came a cost. Refugee transports slaughtered by Imperial reprisal, colonies reduced to glass, civilians who had no choice but to bear the burden of humanity's defiance. Elias carried those deaths like stones in his chest, his nights haunted by faces he could not save. Marcus buried his fear in sarcastic remarks that grew sharper with every battle, but sometimes his hands trembled when no one was looking. Damien grew quieter still, a shadow among men, his soul wearing thinner with every life taken. Adrian debated strategies but also morality, his journals filled with questions that had no answers. And Jonas laughed louder, his recklessness masking the hollow core of a man who did not expect to live to see peace. The turning point came not from battle, but from confession. They captured an alien general, scales dulled with age, pride beaten down by defeat. Under interrogation, he spoke words that none expected. "We thought you fragile. We thought you would break. But you are fire. And fire consumes. You will not stop at us. Once you have learned extinction, you will wield it again. You are the terror we should have feared." The admission struck Elias like a blade. It was not victory he heard, but prophecy. Still, the war marched forward. The Empire, bleeding and desperate, pulled its fleets back to defend the throne world. Humanity pursued with merciless momentum, determined to end not just the war, but the Empire itself. The squad prepared for the final strike, the mission that would define everything they had sacrificed. The Imperial genetic core, the seat of the Empire's twisted experiments and the heart of its power, lay within reach. The infiltration was a descent into hell. They cut through corridors flooded with smoke and blood, each step paid for an exhaustion and pain. Marcus guided them through power conduits with systems he'd cobbled together from scraps. Damien's rifle cracked with lethal precision, each shot covering their advance. Adrian directed them through chaos like a conductor leading a symphony of survival. Jonas planted explosives with manic glee, the corridors behind them collapsing in thunder. And Elias led, relentless, his body battered but his will unbroken, every command edged with fury that had burned too long. They reached the core, a towering chamber of pulsing light where genetic vats stretched like grotesque cathedrals. Inside floated the twisted remains of experiments, humans reshaped into monstrosities, proof of the Empire's depravity. The sight froze them, horror knotting in their throats, but it also solidified their resolve. Jonas whispered, almost reverently, "Time to turn gods into ash." He armed the charges, the seconds ticking down like the heartbeat of vengeance. The final defense came in a wave of armored soldiers, their numbers overwhelming. The firefight was apocalyptic.